Greetings all and welcome to an instructional video on RO membrane loading. Advanced warning, I'm going to do this in one take and I'm holding the camera myself, so you've been warned. Anyways, we happen to have a reverse osmosis skid in our shop that is under construction. You can see it is still incomplete, but it will serve well for our purposes. This video is intended to supplement written instructions, especially those of the manufacturer. So here we'll see the code line membrane housing manual and also the Microdyne Nadir loading guide for pressure vessels. Now, Microdyne Nadir is the manufacturer of the membranes themselves. Some basic things as we look at an RO. We'll see that we have the housings all mounted on the rack here and the membranes are loaded inside. The first point of importance is ROs have an arrangement, an array as they call it, and that is speaking to how the housings are connected together and the flow path of the water. Now this one, the discharge from the pump is incomplete. That's going to be hooked up, and you can see that that is intended to feed the back of this vessel here, the bottom of this vessel. Now these three vessels you'll see are all coupled together. All three of these are working together. So this is a 3-to-2 array RO, wherein these three vessels with flow going this direction, and then yes, as more incomplete piping, then there's going to be piping that's going to connect the top there to the top here, and then we have two vessels that are running in this direction. So that's the flow path for these ones. This is going to have some importance when we start to take a look at what is inside of these housings. I have opened one of these previously, but I'll pick a fresh one. The other thing to note, you'll see that on one side, typically on our ROs, on the left side, we will have our permeate sampling area, and on the right side is where we will have our permeate header. The end plate adapters are the same on both ends. We'll start over on this sampling side. I started with the bottom one yesterday in a failed take, so I'll do this one. You'll see all of them are contained with the snap ring. There's a retaining ring that sits inside of a groove which holds this end plate in. You'll see how easy this one moves because there's no O-ring on it. I installed this one yesterday and there's no play on that. To get this retaining ring out, you're going to lift this tab and begin just to walk it out around the diameter of the shell. Once it pops out, hold on to it or hang it somewhere. And this one will be able to pull out. Again, this is going to pull out very easily because there is no O-ring installed here. But you will see something called the thrust cone. We'll get into that later. You also take note now that ROs are to be kept as hygienic as possible. So you'll see in some of the further instructions that some manufacturers recommend washing all of the pieces. For the permeate side, you're going to have to take a look at how to disassemble the header. In general, we try and make it easy and place unions as required so that we can spin things apart. Now, undoing this one with one hand, holding onto a camera, this is fine. We can almost remove this. Ah! All right, we've removed the permeate header. We're going to want to pay attention that we don't lose any of these O-rings like I just did. And we will open up the one that's the opposite of the side we opened on the other side. So again, pull on that retaining ring, sliding this out. We've got this now. I can hang that one there. Again, this one's going to come out pretty easy because there's no O-ring, but this is a good example that any sort of off-center pulling on this is going to get this thing to jam up pretty good. That certainly has bearing when it comes to being reinstalled. Now we can see this one is wide open and nice and mirror clean. You'll see, unfortunately, this one, it's in the middle, is a bag of O-rings. Those are the O-rings that are for these end plate adapters that go around that groove. I'm not gonna go through fishing that one out. Fortunately, I've opened the lower one earlier and I have a bag of O-rings sitting out. Now we've opened this up. Back to an earlier conversation about the direction of the flow, it needs to be noted that the thrust cones, like we've seen, are going to go on the opposite end of the direction of flow. So in this particular arrangement, again, a 3-to-2, we are going to have 3 thrust cones installed on the back 3 housings, and 2 thrust cones are going to be installed on this side of these 2 housings, sorry. So that is what it is. For thrust cone assembly, thrust cones go this direction, with the large diameter going closest to the membrane. Like I said, inside there is a bag of O-rings. This is the O-ring that belongs with this housing, with this end plate adapter. Lubricants. Parker Super O-Lube is what is recommended by the manufacturer. It needs to be noted that this is a silicone base. Some manufacturers also recommend a product like Molykote 111. Pay attention to what is able to be used in your facility. The other note, again, back to hygiene, is when you're handling a membrane and all of the pieces, you're going to want to make sure that your hands are sanitized, and even more ideally that you wear gloves. So for the start of the exercise, we can install the O-ring on this end plate adapter with the thrust cone. We can lubricate it up, and we can get to inserting it. I'm gonna have a hard time with the camera on this one and doing this one-handed. Now let it be known, I did this yesterday. This one is installed. It's very, very tight in there. When I was installing that one yesterday, it was necessary. And you can imagine, we have a high pressure vessel here. When this went in, when this goes in and that O-ring is installed, it is even more essential to keep this centered as you're putting it in. You're going to find there is going to be some resistance. In order to overcome this, it is advisable to use a large piece of pipe greater than this diameter and use that to either hit it gently, tapping it, or using a lever to pry it in. An example would be using a piece of pipe just like this, and you could pry it off the edge of here and force that end plate in. So when you have the thrust cone installed in this side, and you're going to want to do one housing at a time installing membranes, and since we have the other side opened as well, we can actually start looking at the membranes themselves and the installation thereof. Thrust cones are important for the direction of flow, as is the installation of the membranes. Now, the thrust cones can be pre-installed on the far side, meaning that membranes are going to be pushed in from this side for these 3 housings and from the opposite side for those 2 housings. So this side here and this RO is a 4 membrane RO. So we're going to have 12 membranes on this side being pushed in this way and 8 from the opposite end. Taking a look at the membrane box. Opened this one up yesterday. You are going to want to take care when opening that box with a knife to make sure that you do not affect this precious reverse osmosis membrane. You will note, looking at this membrane, that when you open the box, inside of each of these membranes is an adapter. This is an interconnecting adapter meant to connect a membrane to a membrane. This first membrane that is going to go in will need a interconnecting adapter on one end, but the membranes on either side that connect to these that connect to these end plates are special. These are called product end adapters. You'll see there's a bag of these shipped with your RO, and every adapter comes with a bag complete with 2 shim pieces. This adapter is intended to be installed into one side of the membrane, and the other side goes into this end plate adapter again. The double O-ring side is what's going to go into the membrane, and the single O-ring goes into the end adapter, again with everything being lubricated. The other thing to note when looking at the other 2 things to note when looking at a RO membrane, since I'm here right now, there is a serial number. These should be recorded and a record kept of the location of the membranes inside of each of these housings for any future diagnosis that may be required. The other thing you'll note on here is a flow direction. This is going to help to remind us which direction we are pushing these membranes in. Looking at that now, loading from this side, we will note that the membrane end that goes in first does not have a O-ring seal on this side, but we can see it on this side. Now I want to save opening this one up, but you will notice when you open this up that this is an angled O-ring. This is called a brine seal, and there is an angle on it. And you'll see that that angle corresponds with the direction of flow in which the way that you push these membranes in. This will also need to be lubricated quite heavily when installing the membranes. Since this is the first membrane in the series, and we're just mocking this up, and we know we're pushing this end first, we spoke earlier that this is going to need a product end adapter. So we will lubricate this. Again, the double O-rings are going to be installed into the membrane. This is going to be inserted into the end of the membrane, and then we're going to have this end hanging out just a little bit. With this end of the membrane hanging out, we can lubricate this O-ring and lubricate both O-rings on this, pop this in. We're going to be pushing that membrane into this housing until it's about 100 millimeters sticking out. We're going to have that interconnecting membrane. Then we're going to grab our next membrane. We are going to connect them and push both of those membranes together. We're going to do the same when it comes to the third membrane. By the time we get to that 4th membrane, we're going to feel a little more resistance as we go to push those membranes in. That 4th membrane, being the last membrane in this particular array, is also going to require a product end adapter. That first product end adapter is going to get itself seated inside of the thrust cone on that far end. That second product end adapter is going to be installed in this side. At that point we get to installing the final end plate adapter. So that is going to involve lubricating the O-ring, placing the product end adapter in here, pushing as best as one can to get it as far as possible, using a pipe and a lever to get that to be seated all the way in. There are a number of shimming instructions. As one can imagine, there is some variability within membrane housings. To account for that, it is advisable actually to, with this end plate adapter, to actually not have the O-ring in it yet, to force it in as far as it can go, and then you're going to be able to do something where you can take a sense of that gap that exists between the end plate and this groove and where this retaining ring sits in. If it is found that that plate goes in far and there is a large gap, that is when the use of a spacer is required. And again, I'll refer you to the membrane manufacturer loading guide on shimming elements. And here you'll see those gray spacers. Well, they're not gray in a picture, but those are the gray spacers that come in each of these product and adapter bags. With that being complete, and with a little bit of force, you will have loaded one housing with all of its requisite membranes. That one can be sealed up, and you carry on with the next one. Again, keep in mind to keep everything hygienic and clean as possible. Record the serial numbers. And I believe that may be it. I'm certain I've missed something, but what it is. Be well, everybody. Good night.